Okay, we are back, and in this interview, we're gonna, or I don't want to say interview. I think we're gonna have a discussion more than anything. We're gonna chat about supplements. And Chris, I don't know if you find this, but I find that supplements are one of the things that people are kind of most interested in.
Including me. I love the supplements.
Well,
Before I got into this a few years ago, I'd never taken any kind of supplement or medicine. And now I could run inside and point my camera at the inside of my supplement graveyard, and you'll find I could set up a whole
right.
store, right? Like I have everything you could ever think of. I have it in stock,
That is
and
that is terminology that I've actually stolen from you and used a few times. The supplement graveyard.
I probably stole it from someone else too. But I've had great results. I take a lot of supplements and I feel really good now. So I'm sure they are at least a part of why I feel so good.
Right, right. Well, so let's start there, right? Because you say you take a lot of supplements, you feel really good, and you're sure it's a part. However, just in the way that generally that people think about this, when you read a lot of the news, when you read a lot of the quote unquote science articles, there is so much out there about how supplements are either not doing what they say they're doing, or they're not useful, that there's no conclusive evidence. Why, I just thinking about it from a general perspective, why is there so much in the popular mainstream media about supplements not doing anything, not having effects, not being important, or even being bad in some cases, versus what you're saying, a lot of supplements actually doing a lot of good?
Epidemiology is the one word answer, right?
Right,
So you just take a random sample of the population, and some of them are going to be deficient in certain nutrients, and others are not, and probably mostly not for people eating a nutrient dense diet. And you just throw a bunch of synthetic vitamins at them, and guess what? There's not really any improvement.
right,
And so I think you have to be really targeted about your supplementation. You need to think about what your application is. Is there a way to test to know that you need that supplement? And then if you use those principles rather than just the shotgun approach, then you're going to get much better results. And then another thing that I would mention is the quality. So, I sell supplements. It's part of the way that I make a living. And we always go for the Rolls Royce of supplements, right?
right,
I'm always going to choose on quality. And inevitably that means Thorn Research.
right.
And I know I have a relationship with those guys in that, they've been on my podcast a couple of times, and they're willing to talk to me, and they have total transparency. And I know that they do a lot of testing and a lot of quality assurance, and that they just sell the best stuff. So I'm very, very drawn to them. But if you look at my website, you see I sell supplements from a number of different companies.
Right, who are all pretty much high, very, very high quality, very transparent.
Exactly. Exactly. So there's a big difference between your Costco multivitamin that's just a single tablet that's pressed together with some sand
Right.
versus what you'll find encapsulated from a top flight manufacturer like Thorn Research.
Well, so, just a moment ago, you mentioned you got to be very targeted, right? That somebody's eating a very nutrient-dense diet maybe doesn't need a whole lot. However, in your practice, you do testing for a lot of people, particularly a lot of athletes and a lot of people who want higher performance. How many of their test results come back not needing any supplements?
That's a great question. It's approximately zero.
Right,
Approximately zero, I would say. So, it may be that we have a very unusual sample of the population. So we work with people who are just like me, who are doing something stupid, right? We're doing far too much exercise.
right,
And so our demands may be different from the average person that's trying to do the right thing by health and longevity, rather than trying to get onto the podium in the local bike race. It's kind of, they're different goals.
yeah. I hear that. Although in my head, the response to that might be how many people are doing the right thing in most parts of their life, whether it's with stress, with sleep, with diet. It seems like it's probably not a whole lot. I mean, even, me, I'm pretty cognizant of all of this stuff. I'm pretty good about all this stuff, but I know there are areas in my life, particularly sleep and stress, that are not always where they should be.
Right, exactly. But I mean, when I test my wife, so my wife's a food scientist, and obviously she eats the same diet that I do. It's all her doing the food preparation in our house, the shopping, the planning, the cooking, everything. And I recently ran an organic acids urine test on her, and that looks for common nutrient deficiencies, and she had nothing, literally
Right.
nothing. She doesn't need any supplements at all.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump then specifically to some of the most common supplements that you see people need. Maybe specifically people who are on a keto diet or not, but just in general, what are some of the main supplements that people need to be thinking about?
Well, I think that electrolytes are probably the main things that people should be thinking about on a ketogenic diet, because I think this causes a lot of the problems that people associate with the diet in the early days. And it's difficult for me to empathize with this problem because it's not one that I ever had personally. But having said that, I was just doing the things which can solve this problem anyway. So, for example, drinking bone broth contains lots of sodium, maybe, and it's quite possible that you become deficient in sodium, at least in the first few weeks of switching to a high-fat ketogenic diet. And it's because you lower insulin very rapidly. And insulin sends this message to the kidneys to hang on to sodium. So when you remove that message, you pee out all your sodium, you become deficient in it, and that can cause all kinds of problems. So getting enough sodium, I think, is important. And every single keto resource that you'll ever come across discusses this in detail. And I looked last night, and the Keto Gains Reddit group has a very good discussion of electrolytes on a ketogenic diet.
When I interviewed Luis Villaseñor, it was one of the things that he mentioned as a very important thing is to make sure you're getting enough sodium, because he's like, a lot of people just feel really bad, but it's only because they don't have enough sodium.
Exactly. So the targets that the Keto Gains guys like are 5 to 7 grams of sodium. And you have to remember that table salt is not pure sodium, it's sodium chloride.
Right.
So there's not going to be, we're not talking about 7 grams of table salt, we're talking about 7 grams of sodium. So your mileage will vary depending on what type of salt that you're using.
That's quite
that's quite a lot.
Yeah.
It is quite a bit. So you are definitely going to have to, add some extra salt to your food, or maybe if you're sipping water, you might want to add some salt to that water, and you won't really taste that, but you will get the electrolytes.
And so electrolytes other than sodium, what electrolytes in particular?
So there's potassium as well.
Right.
And there's potassium found in leafy greens, and avocados that are a very high fat food that's quite high in potassium.
Yeah.
And then personally, I supplement as well. So like I said, I'm doing something kind of crazy, which is too much cycling. I'm into cyclocross at the moment, which is a 60-minute event. So not too long, but I do too much exercise. And so I think a really good insurance policy is to take a really high quality multivitamin.
Right.
So I take the Thorne EXOS multivitamin, and that obviously includes extra potassium, and then also magnesium we should talk about as well.
Right. Okay, let's talk about magnesium.
Okay, yeah. So magnesium, the Keto Gains recommendation was for 300 to 500 milligrams of magnesium, and that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. Right. And I have tons and tons of studies that show that athletes are deficient in magnesium, and that may extend to the general population at large, because the soil that we're now growing our vegetables in is becoming very depleted of magnesium.
Right.
And the worst part of the problem is there's not really a good test for magnesium status. So it does exist. You can look for magnesium in packed red blood cells, but there's not much magnesium in packed red blood cells compared to how much magnesium is in your body in total. So you're only looking at a tiny fraction of what's there. And so the result may not be very accurate unless you're very, very deficient in magnesium. So I would recommend that you follow that Keto Gains recommendation and supplement with 300 to 500 milligrams of magnesium every day.
And from what I've seen, it does really extend to the general population. I think there was a book written a few years ago called The Magnesium Miracle that was actually pretty popular and sold a lot. And there were some studies cited in there that pretty much everybody is fairly deficient, particularly in North America right now, in magnesium. I don't know about the rest of the world.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the same. I mean, it's just the industrialization of farming that's causing this problem, I think.
So we've got electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium, which are probably the first thing that people should be looking at, particularly just to feel better, and because these are so deficient in so many people. What else should people be looking for?
Sure. So one of the things that I almost see come up as deficient on the testing that we do is a nutrient called carnitine. That's carnitine, not creatine. Carnitine, there's a difference. They sound the same, but it's two different nutrients. And carnitine, the clue is in the name, right? Carn, or it's coming from meat. So I'm sure that most people watching the summit are eating meat, and so you'll get some carnitine from your diet. And then your body also has the ability to produce carnitine endogenously, so inside of your body. But when you're consuming large amounts and oxidizing large amounts of fat, I think it's possible to become deficient in this nutrient, because you need the carnitine to transport the fats from the outside of a cell into the mitochondria where they're burnt as fuel. And if you lack the carnitine, then it ends up being oxidized in another organelle that's not the mitochondria. It's called a peroxisome. And then you see the elevation of adipate and suberate, and those things can be measured in a urine test, a urinary organic acids test. So I've run lots and lots of these tests on people eating a ketogenic diet, and I would say between 80 and 90% of them are deficient in carnitine. So maybe, and I have to say there is a caveat because I only see athletes, but maybe that would be a good general recommendation for everybody to be supplementing with, say, 3 grams of carnitine per day, and you would divide that into 2 equal doses.
Right. Why would you divide it into 2 equal doses?
Well, I think you're going to be using it constantly just to kind of spread it out, right? So if you consume too much of something, more than your body needs at one time, you're probably going to end up just, conjugating it and peeing it out. Versus if you take it more slowly. I mean, ideally you get it in, like a continuous dose, but since that's not possible, you just do the best you can.
Right. Okay. So electrolytes, carnitine. Anything else?
Yeah, vitamin D, I think, is an important one. So Ivor Cummings, who's a really brilliant chemical engineer that's done his own investigation of the causes of heart disease. He talked about magnesium as well, actually, as being one of the drivers of heart disease that he thought that everybody should supplement. But also your vitamin D status can be really important. And there is a good blood test for vitamin D status. So you can look at 25-hydroxy vitamin D in blood.
That's a pretty typical test, right? I mean,
it's a pretty typical test, but Ivan mentioned that a lot of the doctors don't know which test they should be ordering, and they've been ordering the 125-hydroxy vitamin D. So you have to watch out for that. It's the 25-hydroxy vitamin D that you should be testing for. And for most people, the target should be around 40 to 50 nanograms per milliliter. And I also interviewed Chris Masterjohn, who has done some really great podcasts recently. He also mentioned this in my interview with him, that you should also be testing parathyroid, which is usually abbreviated to PTH, and that should be below 30 picograms per milliliter. And what that does, it's like a secondary measurement that confirms that you are sufficient in vitamin D. So if you're seeing your vitamin D at, say, 30 points, which sounds kind of low, but your parathyroid is also below 30, then you know that your vitamin D calcium economy is sufficient and you're not deficient in vitamin D, so you don't need to supplement.
Right. And, this is true for probably any nutrient, but vitamin D is one of those nutrients that's also counterindicated once you go above a certain point, right? Like once you go above, say, 55, 60.
Exactly. So like in most things in physiology, more is not better. And I actually have a really good article on my website that maybe I can send you the link for, and we can put this in the webpage that hosts this video. But exactly. So once you get up to about 70 nanograms per milliliter, you start to see that vitamin D has an immunosuppressive effect.
Right.
And more is probably not better.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we've gone through electrolytes, we've got carnitine, we've got vitamin D, and I think you've got one more general supplement that people should be thinking about.
Yeah, exactly. So this is another one that Ivor Cummings brought up, and there's a lot of research on this, and it is omega-3s. So omega-3s, they are used to create the phospholipid membrane that surrounds the cell, and you want those membranes to be nice and soft and fluid. And to do that, you need omega-3s that come from the diet. So these are essential fats. And of course, you can, most people know that you can supplement with fish oil. But my preferred way of getting these essential fats is from small cold water fatty fish. So these are perfect ketogenic foods, right? You can go into Amazon.com and there's a brand called Wild Planet. They have these sardines. They're very inexpensive. They're sustainably caught. They're in olive oil. So it's a very high fat ketogenic food. Right. And I noticed they just brought out mackerel as well, which is another small fatty fish. So rather than taking a cod liver oil supplement, you might be better off just eating small cold water fish, because it's just an awesome food. It's just a nicer way of getting those essential fats.
I am currently living in Portugal, which for anybody who's not been to Portugal doesn't really know, Portugal is the world leader in the canned fish industry. So sardines, and they have I don't know what I'm going to do when I get back to the U.S. because Wild Planet and everything, they're just terrible compared to the sardines here. The canned sardines here, because they have such an artisanal industry. There's some now they get a little bit expensive. It can be like $5 to $6 a can for the most artisanal ones, but they are insanely delicious, and I eat at least a can a day. So
Yeah,
So,
it's a real problem. And I would hope that people kind of get into this and start ordering these foods and create the demand because
yeah,
at the moment, I think it's just a US cultural thing where people don't like the strong taste of these small fish and they end up going for cat food. I
right.
mean, the word sardine just means small fish. It's not particular to a species.
Yeah,
And I think the fishermen are catching these fish and nobody wants it. So they just go into
right.
cat food. So
Yeah,
we need to start creating the demand to bring back the industry. And with that will come the artisan foods
yeah,
and better flavor.
right. Absolutely. Okay, so quick recap. Main supplements that people should be thinking about in general are the electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium, carnitine, vitamin D, and omega 3s, hopefully from whole foods like small fatty fish. Now, before we move on, let me ask you about one other that comes up all the time. I just want your opinion on this, but a lot of people mention it, and that's zinc. A lot of people talk about zinc deficiencies.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good one, actually. So, this is another area where we've done a ton of research in our practice for athletes. And we're certain that most athletes are deficient in zinc. And again, it's another nutrient that's very difficult to test for. But we do sometimes see low alkaline phosphatase. So, alkaline phosphatase is something you can measure on a standard blood chemistry. And once it starts to drop below 70, and I forget the units, I need to look at one of my blood chemistries to remember the units. Once it starts to drop below 70, it's a hint that you could be becoming zinc deficient. And that's because alkaline phosphatase is a zinc dependent enzyme.
Right.
And you may find that when you supplement with, and again, I forget the units, like 15 to 30, I think it's nanograms is the units.
Right.
So that would just sanity check those units for me, when you purchase some zinc. It's very inexpensive. And yeah, that's another good one. You may see that your alkaline phosphatase comes up. If it's currently in the 30s or 40s, you may see it come up when you supplement with zinc, and that would be an indication that you're deficient. But there's lots of things that can cause low alkaline phosphatase, so it's not a slam dunk.
Right, right, absolutely. Okay, perfect. So let's move on to kind of the elephant in the room. We're talking about a keto diet, and even a lot of the interviews that you've done for the Keto Summit with people like Patrick Arnold, of course, we're talking a lot about supplements. And one of the obvious most popular supplements related to keto are exogenous ketones. Is that something that people should be considering? And if so, how should they be thinking about it? Why should they use it? When should they use it in general?
Sure. Yeah, it's been a hot topic at this summit and something I've really enjoyed. There's been a little bit of drama, a little bit of dirt slinging. It's obviously, basically they've discovered another macronutrient, right? So we've got fat, we've got protein, we've got carbohydrate, and now we have ketones.
Right.
And I really think it's that prolific. And there's a whole industry that's just waiting to explode onto the scene. And I'm sure some people are going to get really rich if they can figure out how to execute this plan.
And make it taste good.
So, yeah, with that has come much drama and intrigue. And it's been really fun to interview people like Patrick Arnold and then also Dominic D'Agostino, of course. And then Kira Clark from Oxford University was a really interesting interview, too. So to answer your question, you have to first ask another question, which is, who are you? And what are your goals, right? So if you're just someone looking to lose a little bit of weight, then it becomes complicated. So anytime that you put energy into a system, that's going to be counter to your goals to lose some body fat, right? You're putting energy into the system that already has a lot of energy that you would like to dispose of. So we know that beta hydroxybutyrate specifically inhibits lipolysis, and that's just normal physiology that prevents you from going into ketoacidosis. So if you consume beta hydroxybutyrate, then that's going to slow down the amount of body fat that you're oxidizing.
And that's one of the common keto supplements.
It's one of the common keto supplements. Yeah. Exactly. So the exogenous ketones, just to take a step back, the only type that's available commercially on the market at the moment, those are ketone salts.
Right.
So they are either a sodium and potassium liquid or maybe a powder. Some of them have magnesium as a salt that they're made with, but they tend to be not as good, Patrick thinks. And then the other main type of ketone supplement that's available are esters. So these are more like alcohols. It's like a mixture of an alcohol and a fat almost. And as far as I know, those are not commercially available yet. So that's Kieran Clark's group are working on that ester, but it's still not commercially available, although it does look very promising for raising beta hydroxybutyrate, the primary ketone body. So for the person that's looking to lose a little bit of body weight, if the beta hydroxybutyrate is going to inhibit your fat burning, then you're looking for some other advantage from taking the supplement. And that advantage may be in appetite regulation. So I think, as most people will agree that have taken one of these supplements, they really do inhibit your appetite for several hours. And, that may stop you from eating so much food and therefore have weight loss or a fat loss effect. But if you're taking the supplement and it doesn't have any effect on your appetite, then you have to think, well, why am I taking this and what is it for? And there could be some other benefits. So some people might have some neurological benefits. The supplement might act as a nootropic, right? It might help you think more clearly or concentrate harder or something else. So you really have to kind of take a step back and ask yourself, what are my goals?
Right. And what about somebody who's not looking for weight loss? What about somebody who's looking for better athletic performance or, like you said, better mental performance?
Yeah, so again, the evidence is still emerging for this. And we discussed a recent paper in Patrick Arnold's interview. I actually brought it up on screen and we talked about it. And the conclusions from that paper were quite conservative. They said that the evidence didn't support the use of ketone supplements for endurance activity as it stands. But, Patrick, and I would agree with him, said that conclusion was very, very conservative. And I've been using Patrick's ketone salts in bike races for over 2 years now. In fact, 3 years, in fact. And we know that ketones, they generate more energy per unit oxygen. So they're just a more efficient energy molecule.
Right.
And this is obviously a huge advantage for anyone doing, not huge, it's an advantage for anybody doing endurance exercise. Right? If it was a huge advantage, I would be winning, right? But I'm not winning. So it's probably just an advantage. And I do notice, for me, really, really powerful mental clarity. So in the type of bike racing that I do, it's off-road and there's a strong skill element to it. And, when you're turning yourself inside out and you're ready to cough up your lungs and your heart rate's 190 beats, it's not easy to think clearly. And I really notice a difference in my mental ability when I supplement with ketones. And then also I notice I seem to recover faster.
Right.
And that's also consistent with the evidence where they showed a glycogen sparing effect for cyclists that supplemented with ketones. So, yeah, I think if you're doing endurance exercise, the ketone salts they're not a no-brainer, but I think they're certainly useful.
And among, not even necessarily getting into specific brands or anything, but among all of the different ketone supplements, exogenous ketones currently on the market, which are all ketone salts, is there any noticeable difference that somebody should be looking for from one to the next?
I mean, I've been sticking to Patrick salts just because I trust Patrick. Right. Like, you should watch the video. And Patrick talked about this. He thinks that some of these multi-level marketing companies, which will remain nameless in this interview, have been knocking off his patent and producing these ketones inexpensively in China. And he's been testing them with mass spectrometry in his lab and showing them to just have less of the beta hydroxybutyrate than he would expect for the weight of the powder.
Right.
So there's a lot of water locked in with the magnesium salt in particular. So, personally, I would stay the heck away from these multi-level marketing companies. I really dislike the multi-level marketing. I think that you see people selling stuff without really thinking about whether or not it's a good product. There's a suspension of disbelief, which I don't like. And then I've also seen some added ingredients, in particular dairy-based extra ingredients, which is probably fine for most people. They're thinking about the general population and not just people like me. But for the athletes and for me, they have very sensitive guts and they don't tolerate the dairy. So, getting through a triathlon without shitting your pants is hard enough as it is. You don't really want to be adding some weird dairy, protein on top of all that. So, personally, I would stick to Patrick's products, the Keto Canna, Keto Force. And then he announced in my interview that there's going to be a new version of the Keto Force liquid with a lower sodium and potassium load. And that'll be called Keto Force 2.
Okay. The one that tastes a little less salty.
A little less like seawater. Yeah, yesterday I managed to get it down. I did a bike race yesterday and I mixed it with a little bit of the GT's kombucha.
Right.
Just I didn't have anything else. I'm like, oh, heck, we don't have any lemons or limes. I need something slightly acidic because it's very, very alkali.
Right.
And so I just poured in, just an inch into my, mason jar. So just a few, maybe like 100 cc's of GT's kombucha,
Right.
and it wasn't so bad. It just tasted like salty kombucha, and it didn't make me gag or anything like that, so it wasn't too bad. But the keto canna is pretty good. I mean, if you don't mind stevia, some people hate stevia,
Yeah.
but keto canna tastes pretty palatable.
Get a tiny little bit of alcohol in with your keto supplements.
That's what so I made a video of me taste testing the ketone esters,
Right.
and that's exactly what it tastes like. It tastes like a really cheap liqueur,
Right.
sort of like nail polish remover, but slightly oily.
That's
I think
not a glowing recommendation for the taste, but
no, it's not great. And I think they're going to end up encapsulating that personally, like maybe micro encapsulating it. Right. So,
right.
You'd have little tiny macromolecules of this ketone ester, and then you micro encapsulate that in something else, and then you won't taste it.
Yeah.
Rather than, like a really huge capsule and you gobbling down 30 of them. Because, because of the oil, it sort of spreads around the inside of your mouth and then you can't get rid of it. It's not very nice. You can't wash it down, right? It's like, yeah.
That is not something I'm looking forward to trying anytime in the near future. Although I have to admit, like, even half the things I eat and drink, Louise will eat and drink. And she's like, "How do you do that?" I'm like, "Well, it's not really that bad, like." Like even some of my green shakes that I make and put the greens powder and everything in, I mean, they're fine. But they're not nearly anything like that. Let's get just a little bit further in the weeds. So actually, well, slight recap, but I think in general somebody could probably stop here, right? A lot of
you could stop. I mean, the electrolytes are really the only thing that I think that everybody on a keto diet needs to think about.
Yeah, and then even the other three: carnitine, vitamin D, omega-3s, and potentially zinc, all important to think about. But you could get by without doing them. It's not something that's necessarily done.
I mean, I never thought about electrolytes even when I went onto a keto diet, and I didn't have any keto flu. I didn't have any weird cramps. I didn't get any headaches or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it's just because I was just doing that as part of I didn't go from a standard American diet to keto. I went from 2 years of a paleo diet that was prepared by my food scientist that does this type of coaching for a living. And all I did was I stopped eating so many sweet potatoes and other starchy vegetables and replaced that with more fat. And that was my keto diet. Yeah,
that's not a bad starting point. But if somebody did want to get a little more in the weeds, because you are one of the people who is really, really into this.
Let's get to it. All of the supplements. Come on, give us all the supplements.
If we wanted to go really deep, what are, you and I were talking yesterday, and I admit I'm not even this deep into the supplements, although I used to sort of be. NAD, let's start there.
Okay. Yeah, so this is definitely the hot new supplement on the scene that, it's almost beyond my pay grade to do the research into this. And this is where my chief medical officer, Tommy Wood, is so very, very helpful. And I know that you're going to be interviewing him to do some of the masterclasses so people will get to meet him. So NAD Plus is a major precursor to the NADH, which is the electron donor inside of the TCA cycle, inside of the mitochondria, inside of the cell. So some people call the mitochondria the battery. So it's like the energy production plant inside of your cells. And in order for that to keep running, this TCA cycle, you need to keep recycling NAD plus into NADH and then back again. And it seems as people age, they seem to become deficient in NAD plus. And NAD plus activates a whole bunch of enzymes, including this suite of enzymes called sirtuins, which are strongly implicated in longevity. So you take the NAD plus, you take nicotinamide riboside, which is a precursor to NAD plus, and then you increase the cellular levels of NAD plus, and then hopefully that makes you live longer. But we've started to see now, it's just popping up everywhere in the research that we're doing, that the NAD plus to NADH ratio is implicated in all kinds of chronic disease. So diabetes in particular, you see very low ratios of NAD plus to NADH. And so there may be a blood sugar lowering effect by improving insulin resignaling and it's called the redox state of the cell. So the energy status of the cell. So you take the you take the nicotinamide riboside, you increase the amount of NAD plus, and then you improve the signaling and you bring more energy into the cell. So you might see a blood glucose lowering effect. But yeah, that's certainly a very exciting supplement that I've been taking for about 6 months now.
And what have you seen? I mean, longevity, you're still alive, but
Still alive. Yes, it's one of those supplements where you're like, yeah, exactly. As somebody that runs a functional medicine practice, I need to move to a model where I get paid if you're still alive,
right.
right? And of course, that's not new. We've seen that in other, I think it's Chinese medicine. They have like some
Yeah.
cultures where they pay the doctor if you're not sick.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a difficult one to quantify. You may see, like I say, a blood glucose lowering effect, and I have seen some reports of that. Again, I mean, I just really can't think of another way to quantify the improvement. And it's not the only supplement that has this effect. So resveratrol is something that people have heard of. Also has this effect where it stimulates the sirtuin suite of enzymes. And then there's another supplement called, it's quite difficult to say. I think it's pronounced pterostilbene.
Right.
So it's got a P on the front of it that's silent.
Yeah.
And it's like a more potent version of resveratrol that
Right.
stimulates these sirtuin
Comes
enzymes.
mostly from berries, right? Like blueberries.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
like the concentrated extract of the pigment that appears in the skin of some fruits and vegetables.
Right. And so I think some of the supplement companies are actually mixing the NAD. So I can actually say the Nico.
Nicotinamide riboside.
Yeah, there you go. Mixing that with the pterostilbene.
Exactly. Yeah. So Thorne has a supplement like that. They have a couple of them now
Right.
that we've been selling a lot of. And we look for this again. I should mention we do have a way to quantify this. So we look at the NAD plus to NADH ratio on the urinary organic acids test that I mentioned earlier that measures
Right.
carnitine sufficiency. So some of the enzymes, like to convert pyruvate into lactate, uses up NAD plus.
Yeah.
And then there's others like to convert acetoacetate, which is a ketone body, into beta hydroxybutyrate, also uses up NAD plus. So we measure these things on the organic acids test, and then we look at the ratio and then try and determine somebody's NAD plus to NADH ratio. And then if the ratio is really, really low, then we consider that athlete to be a good candidate for supplementing with nicotinamide riboside. So there is a way. I just suddenly thought of that as we were talking, that there is a way
Right.
to quantify this, but it does involve a $400 urine test. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Although that test in particular, I mean, you and I have talked about it before. It's probably the single test that everybody, if they were getting one test, is one of the most useful. Not obviously, it's more useful when you're doing it in conjunction with other tests also. But that test also shows you a lot of the other things that you were talking about, the carnitine, a lot of other breakdowns in certain cycles.
Yeah, exactly. It can show B vitamin status. Like lots of people are deficient in B vitamins, in particular folate and B12, and it shows deficiency of those. And it also looks at neurotransmitter turnover, and then it finds overgrowths of yeast and fungus and bacteria.
Yeah.
And it looks for oxalates that appear in food but are also produced by candida. Yeah, it's a super cool test, and I'm fully expecting that. I have this vision of this toilet that's being worked on in Japan somewhere, and it's going to have mass spectrometry on an integrated circuit, and then every time you pee, it's
Right.
going to send you an email that shows you the level of all these organic acids in your last urine sample, and then you'll know exactly what's going on inside of your body every time you take a pee.
Yeah, once mass spectrometry gets down to like the Star Trek replicator level, it's that's where it's at.
You know,
Of
at
course
the
it will
moment, it's
happen.
like some huge machine at the Great Plains Laboratory at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of time before it's on a tiny integrated circuit, and it will happen.
I know we're not talking about testing in particular, we're focusing more on supplements, but one of the things I love about that test, and I tell everybody, is that 99% of tests essentially take a snapshot of something, whereas
Right.
the urine organic acids tests is the most functional of tests, like even more so than like a stool test or something, because it actually shows you where and which processes are breaking down in your body and why they're breaking down. It gives you all of that information to know that, hey, it doesn't matter how much vitamin D you might have in your blood, how much vitamin D anything shows you, or let's say B12, right? If you're not recycling methionine into homocysteine and it's breaking down at this point, then you know that no matter how much B12 you have, it's not enough because it's breaking down at that particular point, and it can show you that. So I always talk about that test a lot because I absolutely love it.
Yeah, absolutely. It provides so much actionable information. There's very few things that you can act on when you do a blood test, you know?
Right.
So for example, you mentioned homocysteine there. Say you found high homocysteine on a blood chemistry. Well, there's a lot of things that could cause that, right? You could be eating too much methionine, you could be deficient in B12, you could be deficient in folate. There's lots of things. And I mean, obviously you could do a dietary analysis and say, oh, look at that. I'm eating a lot of muscle meat and not much organ meat and that, so it could be methionine. But the organic acids test can say definitively whether you are deficient in B12 or folate.
Right.
And so you can just rule those things out as possible nutrient deficiencies. So it's like very, very actionable information.
Okay, so we've talked about NAD. Let's. I think you've got one more. Let's go through one more supplement that if somebody really, really wanted to go down the rabbit hole, that they would jump into.
Creatine would be
Creatine.
my next choice for certain. And the creatine is something that I supplement with every day, 5 grams of creatine.
Right.
And creatine is probably the most studied sports nutrition supplement on the market. So I would encourage people to do their own homework on all of these supplements. You know, go on to PubMed and type creatine monohydrate and see how many results you get back. It's really, really well understood and really well studied.
Right.
And it's almost impossible to buy crap creatine, right? There's only one company that makes it. You can get the Now Foods brand from Amazon, and it's going to be just fine.
Right. It's staggering how much research there's been on it, and I feel like it is the only supplement out there where there's practically no dispute of like the effects. The effects are so well established for that supplement versus anything else, even versus like multivitamins, vitamin D, magnesium, anything like that. Like creatine seems to be the one where there's so much evidence just pointing like, hey, it's actually beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, and so the only real variation, you know, some people are hyper responders and some people don't respond to it very well.
Right.
And when I say respond, I mean they see an improvement in their high intensity power, right? So if you're going in the gym and you're doing some deadlifting or squats, you may be able to squeak out that extra rep or extra 2 reps or something like that. And that could make all the difference between your workout being a success or not. For me in particular, it's been really helpful for improving my top end power on the bike. So, you know, I mentioned I'm into cyclocross now, and the courses, they're very tight and there's lots of hairpin bends. And so, you know, on paper, when you look at my power data, it just looks like a series of short sprints. You know, it's like round this hairpin, sprint, round this hairpin, sprint.
Right.
And so the creatine, I feel like it really helps me with that top end punch. And I've actually measured this, you know, done a before and after and looked at my power data. And I saw an 8% improvement when I supplemented with creatine. Wow. And that's huge for me. At the level that I compete at, you know, that's a really, really huge improvement for just mixing in some powder into a drink, right? Like, I mean, you know, things don't really get any easier than that. And I have this hypothesis about why some people respond so well to it and others not so much. And it's because making creatine endogenously inside your body, so it's like carnitine, it's the same thing. You can make creatine inside of your body, but it's a very methylation dependent process. Right. So methylation is a very important biochemical process that goes on inside your body all the time, billions of times per second. And it does all kinds of really, really important things. But the most expensive thing from a methylation standpoint is making creatine. So if you stink at methylation, maybe you've done one of those 23andMe tests and you've looked at your SNPs in the MTHFR pathway, and we know that people have poor methylation status from doing a urinary hormone test. So on our urinary hormone test, we look at a metabolite of estrogen called 2-hydroxy-E1, and then to convert that 2-hydroxy-E1 into 2-methoxy-E1 requires methyl donors. And so we see that people stink at methylation on that test. All of our athletes stink at methylation. So not only are they athletes that require that extra high-end pop, they also can't make the creatine. So, you know, for the athletes, supplementing with creatine, especially as it's so inexpensive and always pure, it seems like a no-brainer. That is a slam dunk.
It is. It is really expensive. You get a huge like gallon jar of this stuff, like $10. It's
yeah, and it's all made by the same company. You know, I mean, I get my stuff from Thorne, and you know, that's mostly just a loyalty, a brand loyalty thing, but there's really no reason for that. I think probably just make sure that if you buy creatine, it's not got a whole bunch of other junk in it, right? Like sometimes you'll see it mixed up with, you know, branched chain amino acids and a whole bunch of weird multicolored sugars and stuff. You're like, no, that's not what. Just get pure creatine monohydrate, and that's going to work great.
Awesome. Well, I think this has been really useful, particularly for how people should or could think about going down the rabbit hole a little bit, sticking their foot in, or jumping all, Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole. And
Yeah, I
the
just should add one more thing, Jeremy, that I just thought of.
okay,
That's regarding magnesium supplementation. And I noticed on the Reddit, the Keto Gains Reddit forum, that they were suggesting magnesium citrate. And that seems to be the preferred type of magnesium that Thorne Research use. That's what's in all
yeah,
of their supplements. For me personally, if I supplement with that much magnesium citrate, it's going to give me the shits. I'm going to be running to the
yeah,
bathroom and it's going to give me loose stools. So I find that magnesium glycinate is the best adsorbed. So what's going on here? And you can, this is a great cure for, well, I say cure, it's a great solution for constipation. If you can't go to the bathroom, then take something that's going to create an osmotic pressure in the colon, right? It's not going to be absorbed very well,
yeah,
like Epsom salts, which is just cheap magnesium, right? That's going to create an osmotic gradient in the colon, stop the water from being absorbed, and then you
right,
get loose stool. Or if you've got constipation, it's going to help you go. Now, if you've already got regular digestion, that's not what you want. So you want all of the magnesium to be absorbed. And for me, the type of magnesium that's the best absorbed is by far magnesium glycinate. So that's the only little thing I forgot to say earlier. But
have you looked into Natural Stacks, their MagTech that is a blend of, it's got magnesium glycinate, magnesium taurate, and magnesium, it's not citrate, I forget what the third one is, but I've looked at some of the research on that, which looks like those three in general absorb very well.
Yeah, I have. I interviewed Ryan Munsey for my podcast, and he sent me some of that magnesium, and I have been using it. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, I was just wondering because I've looked at that. I don't have any right now, but I was thinking of ordering some.
Yeah, that's a really good choice for magnesium.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, perfect. I think everybody's going to love this. And, if they want to get more into the supplements, they can obviously watch Dominic, Patrick, Kieran Clark. They're a lot deeper dive into that. But this, I think, is a particularly good start for people.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome.